It was supposed to be a night filled with love and celebration. Our 10th wedding anniversary, a milestone most couples dream of reaching. I wore the dress he bought me, a sleek black number that clung to me in all the right ways. I wanted to look perfect for him. I wanted to feel perfect. But deep down, I knew I didn't deserve it. I wish I could say I planned it better, that I had everything under control. But life has a funny way of slipping through your fingers when you're juggling lies. My husband, he's an amazing man. The kind of partner every woman dreams of. Yet here I was, risking it all for a thrill. For a man who wasn't him. It started innocently enough. Doesn't it always? A smile here, a text there. Ethan, my secret lover, was dangerous in a way my husband never was. He challenged me, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. He wasn't better than my husband, not by a long shot. But he was different. And sometimes, different is enough to unravel everything. The night of our anniversary, Ethan begged me to see him. "Just 1 hour," he whispered over the phone. I should have said no. God, I wanted to. But his voice had this way of pulling me in, like gravity. I told myself I'd meet him quickly, then return home before my husband even noticed. The restaurant where Ethan and I met was small, intimate, the kind of place where secrets are safe. We sat in a shadowed corner, my heart pounding with every second that ticked by. Ethan leaned across the table, his hand brushing mine. "Are you sure he doesn't know?" he asked. I laughed it off, but inside, panic churned. Did my husband know? Was I that good at hiding the truth? Or was he that trusting? Either way, the guilt gnawed at me like a hungry wolf. Still, I stayed. Because even guilt couldn't compete with the rush Ethan gave me. When I finally got home, my husband greeted me with the warmest smile. He'd cooked dinner, lit candles, even bought my favorite wine. The sight of it made my stomach twist. How could I betray this man? How could I sit across from him, knowing where I'd just been? But I smiled back, pretended everything was normal. We clinked glasses, exchanged memories, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that I could have it all, my husband and my lover, until it all came crashing down. The next morning, my husband left early for work, or so I thought. I used that time to call Ethan. "Last night was too close," I whispered, my voice shaking. "We can't keep doing this." But Ethan? He didn't take no for an answer. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice low and commanding. "You're just scared." He was right. I was terrified. Terrified of losing my husband. Terrified of losing Ethan. And most of all, terrified of losing myself. Days turned into weeks, and the lies piled up. Every time I looked at my husband, I felt a little piece of me crumble. But I couldn't stop. The thrill, the danger, it was addictive. Ethan and I became reckless, meeting in riskier places, taking bigger chances. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, and my husband was out of town, or so he said. Ethan and I met at our usual spot, his hands on me the moment I walked through the door. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The tension between us said it all. But then I heard it. The sound of a car door slamming. My blood turned to ice as the front door creaked open. My husband's voice echoed through the house, calling my name. Panic set in. Ethan froze, his eyes wide with fear. "What do we do?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer. What happened next was a blur. My husband walked in, his eyes locking on mine first, then on Ethan. The look on his face, betrayal, anger, heartbreak, it shattered me. He didn't yell, didn't scream. He just stood there, staring at us, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And then, in the calmest voice I've ever heard, he said, "So this is what I mean to you." I wanted to explain, to apologize, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? That I was bored? That I was selfish? That I didn't know how to stop? Ethan tried to leave, but my husband blocked the door. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice cold and steady. What followed was a conversation I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. My husband asked questions I couldn't answer, made accusations I couldn't deny, and through it all, Ethan just stood there, silent and useless. By the time it was over, my husband was gone. He walked out the door without looking back, leaving me alone with Ethan. And in that moment, I realized something. Ethan wasn't worth it. The excitement, the danger, it all paled in comparison to the love I'd thrown away. I begged my husband to come back, to forgive me, but some betrayals can't be undone. So here I am, telling my story, not for sympathy, not for forgiveness, but as a warning. Love isn't something to be taken for granted. And trust? Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to repair. If I could go back, I'd choose differently. I'd choose him, every time. After my husband walked out that night, I was left in the suffocating silence of my own choices. Ethan tried to console me, but his words felt hollow. How could he possibly understand the depth of what I'd lost? I turned to him, my voice breaking. "You need to leave." He looked at me, confused. "What do you mean? We can get through this together." Together. That word felt like a slap in the face. There was no together anymore. Ethan had been a fleeting escape, a mirage that disappeared the moment reality crashed in. I didn't want him there. I didn't want him at all. Once Ethan was gone, I sat alone in the dark, replaying everything in my mind. Every decision, every lie, every moment that led to this disaster. How had I become this person? The kind of woman who destroys her own happiness for a cheap thrill? I thought about my husband, the man who'd loved me unconditionally, who'd stood by me through every hardship. I thought about the way his face crumpled when he saw me with Ethan. That image haunted me, burned into my mind like a scar I'd never erase. I couldn't just let it end like this. I had to try, even if it was hopeless. The next morning I called him, over and over. No answer. I texted, sent emails, even showed up at his office. He wouldn't see me. He was hurt, and I couldn't blame him. But the silence was unbearable. I needed him to know I was sorry, that I loved him, that I would do anything to fix this. But how do you fix something so utterly broken? I thought about writing him a letter, but words felt inadequate. How do you condense the weight of your regret into a few paragraphs? Still, I wrote one anyway, pouring my heart onto the page. In the letter, I told him the truth, the whole truth. I told him about the emptiness I'd felt, the selfishness that had driven me to Ethan. I admitted every lie, every betrayal. And then I begged for his forgiveness, begged for a chance to prove that I could be better. I left the letter on his desk at work, praying he would read it, praying it would be enough. But days turned into weeks, and there was no response. He'd moved out of our home, staying with a friend. I was alone, surrounded by the ghost of our life together. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos of us, pictures from our wedding, our vacations, our lazy Sunday mornings. We looked so happy, so in love. I couldn't stop crying, because I knew that no matter how much I wanted to turn back time, I couldn't. What was done, and all I could do was live with the consequences. And then, one evening, the doorbell rang. My heart leapt as I rushed to answer it, hoping it was him. It was. He stood there, his expression unreadable. He held the letter I'd written, crumpled and creased from being read and reread. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice heavy, "about everything." My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to pull him into my arms to tell him how much I missed him. But I didn't move. I let him speak. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said. "What you did, it broke something in me. Something I don't know if I can fix." Tears streamed down my face. "I know," I whispered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I love you. and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and love. "Do you really mean that?" What followed was the hardest conversation of my life. We sat in the living room, unpacking every ugly truth, every unspoken feeling. He told me how betrayed he felt, how he'd questioned everything about our relationship. I told him about the emptiness I'd been carrying, the loneliness I hadn't known how to articulate. And then I told him about Ethan, about how it had never been about love, but about filling a void I didn't even understand. By the end of the night, we were both emotionally drained. He didn't say whether he'd stay or leave. He just said he needed time. And so, I waited. Weeks went by, and I focused on myself. I started therapy, trying to untangle the mess of emotions that had led me to betray the man I loved. I learned things about myself I'd never acknowledged: my fears, my insecurities, my need for validation. It was a painful process, but a necessary one. If I wanted any chance of rebuilding what I'd destroyed, I had to start with myself. One day, my husband called. His voice was calm but guarded. "I want to meet," he said. We met at a quiet cafe, the tension between us palpable. I didn't know what to expect. "I've been thinking a lot," he began. "About us, about whether we can move forward." My heart pounded as I listened. "And?" I asked, barely able to breathe. He took a deep breath. "I'm willing to try, but it's going to take time. And it's going to take work. A lot of it." Relief flooded through me, but I knew this wasn't a victory. It was a second chance, a fragile one. "I'll do whatever it takes," I promised. And so, we began the slow, painful process of rebuilding. We went to couples therapy, confronted our demons, and worked to rebuild the trust I had shattered. It wasn't easy. There were days when it felt impossible, but through it all, I held on to one thing: hope. I wish I could tell you that everything is perfect now, that we've healed completely and moved on. But the truth is, some wounds leave scars. Our marriage will never be what it was before. But maybe that's okay. Because what we're building now, it's real, it's honest, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm truly fighting for something worth saving. So if you're watching this, and you're thinking about making the same mistake I did, don't. The cost is too high. Love is fragile. And trust? Trust is everything.